True crime can get pretty heavy sometimes for both myself and for you guys as viewers/listeners, I'm sure. So occasionally I like to cover something a little bit lighter, something with a few less stakes. And our case today perfectly fits the bill because we're going to be talking about the time that it rained meat in Kentucky. Slivers of meat falling from the sky on a perfectly clear day. And this happened 148 years ago, and still there are no real answers as to how this happened. But of course, there are a lot of theories, and we're going to explore them all. But first, I want to talk to you about our sponsor today, Ana Luisa. I have been a fan of Ana Luisa and their jewellery for a really long time now. I'm a big jewellery girl, but I am a gold jewellery girl, and it is so hard to find quality pieces that don't tarnish, especially when you're on more of a budget. Jewellery can be crazy expensive, but designs on Ana Luisa start at just $39. And hear me out, adulthood is being willing to spend like $50 on a piece of jewellery that I know is going to last me versus spending that same amount over the course of like a year just rebuying cheap jewellery again and again and again because it just keeps tarnishing. Have I matured? It's about investment, people, and like it's not even that crazy of an investment. It just makes sense. You have definitely seen me wearing Ana Luisa jewellery in my videos before. Like these hoop earrings I'm currently wearing are my everyday earrings. Like seriously, you can go back and check in my videos. I'm wearing them in pretty much every single one. And these are the low medium hoops. I also always wear this ring on my thumb. This is the Ivor ring. And so I'm very excited to have 2 more Ana Luisa pieces for my collection. I've been on the hunt for a really simple initial necklace for ages now, so I know I'm going to get so much wear out of this really cute, really dainty necklace. It's just got a tiny G on it. I am obsessed with it. I'm going to wear this all the time. And also, I got this bracelet as well. Sorry, look at this. This is the Aura watch strap bracelet, and I'm just obsessed with it. I've been wearing it like every day this week. I love the chunkiness. It kind of adds like a bit of a masculine edge to any outfit, and I'm going to be wearing this just constantly. Like it's so gorgeous. So, to summarise, Ana Luisa has unmatched quality. It's long-lasting, it's hypoallergenic, it's water-resistant and sustainable. They also have free and fast shipping within the US, which is where I know a lot of you are from, but they also have super affordable shipping everywhere else in the world too. And again, even to the UK, it's really fast, like surprisingly fast. And the cherry on top of the cake is you have a worry-free 2-year guarantee on all products you buy. So if you do get something and it does, God forbid, start to tarnish or it breaks, you don't need to worry. Ana Luisa will sort it out for you. So if you want to check out Ana Luisa for yourself and get your hands on some quality jewellery, you can use my link that you'll find in the top line of the description. Honestly, Ana Luisa are now my go-to for any jewellery that I want. Like I love it. And with that, let's get back to talking about the Kentucky meat shower. Honestly, there is no integration I could do in this video that would make it subtle. Just go in and talk about meat falling from the sky. There's nothing. The 3rd of March 1876 started out like any other day for Rebecca Crouch. She lived 2 or 3 miles outside a place called Olympian Springs in Bath County in Kentucky. It's this tiny little area known for its mineral springs and their alleged medicinal properties. This was somewhat of a tourist destination in the 1800s, but it had its residents too, like people lived there, and the Crouches were one of the families that lived there. It was Alan and Rebecca Crouch, and I think they had children, but they were all grown up, but they spent a lot of time just like looking after their grandkids. They had a nice, quiet life. Their home was surrounded on all sides by mountains on a plot of about 80 acres of land, and I can imagine it was this beautiful, picturesque place, especially on a day like that March day. They were coming into spring, there would have perhaps been a slight chill in the air, but the sky was clear, it was blue, like spring was really on its way. So that morning, Rebecca Crouch was taking care of her grandson, and they were outside making some soap. And then, sometime between 11 a.m. and midday, she noticed something strange land next to her with a splat. It kind of looked like a piece of meat, and then she noticed more meat just falling all around her. She said she asked her grandson, "What is that falling, Alan?" He was also called Alan, just like her husband. I assume it was a family name. To which he looked up and said, "Why, Grandma, it's snowing." but obviously it wasn't snow. Once Rebecca realised what was going on, there was this weird meat falling from the sky, she panicked and ran inside the house. She was way too scared to stick around outside and see what was going on. And seeing as this did happen in 1876, coverage of this is fairly sparse. There are a few great newspaper articles from the time, but generally there's not loads of information. So that means you do need to use your imagination a little bit though in filling in the blanks of this story. I mean, I can only imagine that Rebecca ran inside, then watched through her window as the rest of the meat fell from the sky. At least that's what I would do. She would later say it fell for not less than 1 minute, nor more than 2 minutes duration. So basically it fell for anywhere between 1 and 2 minutes. Her husband and son were away from the house at this time, and she said that her immediate thought was that this was their flesh, that somehow they had been torn to pieces and this was them being returned to her. And this kind of thought process does sound very extreme perhaps, but as a serious anxiety sufferer myself, I can confirm that something like this is also exactly where my mind would go as well. Something slightly out of the ordinary has happened, everyone I love must be dead. Rebecca also said that she became impressed with the conviction that this was a miracle of God, that this was maybe some sort of warning of events that were on the horizon. But clearly Rebecca wasn't the curious sort, or at least she was pretty scared, so she didn't really go and investigate what was going on after it stopped. Instead, she just waited inside the house for her husband and son to return home, who she told all about it. Who I'm pleased to announce they actually did return home. They were not killed and stripped into meat pieces and then rained down on their house. That would have been crazy. Alan was the one to go out and explore, and that's Alan the husband, not Alan the grandson. He went outside and picked up multiple pieces of what seemed to be meat off the floor and fences. All in all, the meat seemed to have dropped over an area of about 100 yards in length and 50 yards wide. And for context, a standard international football or soccer pitch is 112 to 115 yards long and 70 to 75 yards wide. So we're talking an area just a little bit smaller than a football pitch. The meat pieces all varied in size and shape. Some of the bits were 3 or 4 inches square, which is the same size as / bigger than my palm. Yes, I did measure it. Other pieces were thinner and longer, others were smaller. It wasn't uniform at all, and there was a lot of it. The sources differ as to just how much meat there was, and the units of measurement they used here aren't the most relatable to a modern audience. One source describes how there was enough meat to fill an entire horse cart, whilst the New York Herald, who did actually later directly speak to Rebecca after the incident, said that she said there was not less than half a bushel. Now, I certainly didn't know what a bushel was going into this, and so I assume a lot of you wouldn't know either. So according to Google, it's a measure of capacity equal to 64 US pints or 35.2 litres. It's basically an old imperial unit of volume used in the US. So yeah, imagine about 17.5 litres worth of meat pieces. And this was after the animals had already been freely eating the meat off the floor. They had hogs, chickens, a cat and a dog, and they'd all been having a real good time. I can imagine it was like Christmas Day for these animals, like meat literally falling from the sky. Rebecca was asked by the reporter from the New York Herald if she noticed anything strange in the animal's behaviour afterwards, and she said that the dog did become sick and he wasn't in a very good way, but she doesn't expand on this any further. So we don't know how sick the dog was, we don't know if she simply means he was physically sick or if he was sick as like generally sick and ill. It's also not confirmed if it was the meat that made him sick or it could have just been a coincidence, but I don't think he died from this. I think he ended up being fine, and the rest of the animals were also absolutely fine, so it's not like they were poisoned. The New York Herald reporter also spoke to a local butcher called Mr. Frisbee. He basically called upon him for his meat expertise, and Mr. Frisbee said that he had seen the meat, but not just that, he had also eaten it. 2 days after the event, he had heard what had happened, and so he went to investigate, as was his duty as a butcher. When asked if he tasted it, he responded, "I did that at the Springs in the presence of several persons, some of whom told me it was a dangerous experiment, but I told them my constitution would stand as much of it as a rooster's or a cat's," basically being like, well, if a rooster can eat it and not die, then surely I can too. So he did. But it's okay because he didn't actually swallow any of the weird sky meat. He said he intended to at first, but after chewing it for a little bit, he changed his mind and spat it out. Apparently the meat didn't taste like anything Mr. Frisbee had ever tasted before. He said it didn't taste like fish, flesh or fowl, but he did say it looked more like mutton than anything else. He also said that it didn't smell like anything he knew. The scent was completely new to him. He described it as more of a tender meat. When he pulled it apart, there was a sort of like fine stringy fibre running through it in all different directions. And if you've got a weaker stomach, then prepare yourself for this next bit because it is particularly rough. The butcher then described how there was no blood on the meat, but as he was handling it, a milky, watery fluid oozed out of it. And yes, he still tried to eat it. I personally have a very delicate constitution, shall we say, when it comes to food. Like, I can't hack the idea of like food being played with or touched. Like, I can't even, like, once I've finished a meal and the plate's out in front of me, once like the sauces start to like congeal, no, it has to, I cannot sit with like old food in front of me. I can't think of playing with food. No. This video was rough for me. It was really rough to research. Other witnesses also agreed that the meat was very soft, but it wasn't bloody, although apparently it did smell of fresh blood, some people said. I imagine that sort of like tangy, irony scent. Local grocer Joe Jordan was another person who was brave enough to try and eat the meat. He said he bit off a piece but spat it out very quickly, and quickly enough that he didn't really notice any particular taste, although apparently this was a week after the meat fell and it had started to dry out at this point, and the mere thought of that is turning my stomach. This meat falls from the sky, alleged meat falls from the sky, and this guy not only eats it, but he eats it a week after it fell. And he doesn't even cook it. It's just raw, dry, week-old meat. No. Jordan said that he squeezed some of the meat pieces and a brown mucus came out of it, and at this point the smell was described as offensive in the extreme, like that of a dead body, which, yeah, no shit, it's been a week. So in the aftermath, it kind of seems like the meat was distributed around the area. The animals ate some was kept in alcohol at the grocer's. There wasn't any huge effort that went to preserving the meat. I mean, I doubt at the time they were like, hey, if we preserve this correctly, curious people in the future might be able to get an answer. But like, there are still a few pieces today preserved in formaldehyde by scientists who managed to get a hold of some samples, but you can't really test things once it's been in formaldehyde. Like, it's too strong. One piece has been under the care of Transylvania University for the last 150 years, which is a private university in Lexington in Kentucky. They've studied the meat, they've tried to DNA test it, but everything's come back inconclusive. It just wasn't stored under the correct conditions. So, let's talk about some theories. How did this meat fall from the sky? Of course, the first thing I should probably cover is the possibility that this might be a hoax. Even when this happened back in 1876, there were people who didn't believe it. Rumours flew about the honesty of Rebecca Crouch. Even in the New York Herald article, the first thing the reporter did was check the reputation of Rebecca, asking locals if she was a trustworthy person. When asked, Mr. Frisbee, the butcher, said that he knew the whole family. They're members of the church and they're good people. He said that anything they said about the meat is as true as gospel. The general consensus in the area was that the Crouches were good, God-fearing people, that they wouldn't lie about something like this. However, that didn't stop rumours about how apparently Rebecca and Alan had been arguing recently about selling the farm. According to whispers around Olympian Springs, she wanted to sell the farm whilst Alan didn't, and so she had created this hoax in order to scare him into selling. When the reporter mentioned this rumour to the couple, they all laughed. Rebecca said, "It is true that I want to sell the place, but I have never quarrelled with Mr. Crouch about the matter. He's more anxious to sell than I am." And Alan confirmed this, saying that he'd like to move to Indiana where they had a son, and they could just live a generally easier life. And so without the motive of Rebecca wanting to sell the house, what else was there? Some people say that she apparently just wanted attention, she wanted to become famous, and there's no way to conclusively say whether or not she wanted this. But in the 1870s, people didn't really have the craving for celebrity and fame like people might do now, and it was a lot harder to get to that level. I doubt Rebecca realised when she told people what had happened that within a couple of days she'd have national publications talking about her and her little farm, that she'd have reporters from New York turning up on her doorstep. I don't really know, you can't rule out that she was looking for attention, but it doesn't really seem in character for her from what everyone else who knew her has to say. So for the sake of this episode, let's just assume that this was not a hoax. As you can imagine, almost immediately this meat shower caused endless speculation. The New York Herald wrote of theories about the meat falling from the lunch basket of a passing balloonist, which might have made sense if this was like 1 or 2 pieces of meat, but I doubt anyone is taking this much meat into a hot air balloon with them and then just letting it drop over the side, no. One man called Professor Smith examined the meat at the time and he hypothesised that this was not meat at all, but instead it might have been frog spawn. Something which literally every other person who saw the meat said that it wasn't, it was not frog spawn. Meat and frog spawn are 2 very different things. Spawn is very jelly-like with tiny black dots at the centre of the eggs. And regardless, how does frog spawn falling from the sky make much more sense than meat? Apparently there was discussion at the time of a strong gust of wind lifting the spawn from a nearby pond, but Rebecca described the meat as falling from the sky like rain, not being caught in the wind and blown at her. Plus, remember, she said this was a very clear day, the sky was blue, there was no strong wind. Maybe there was a light breeze, but nothing that would lift frog spawn out of a pond, so this theory was dismissed pretty quickly. About 3 months after the incident came the first pretty detailed theory, or at least the first theory that people were like, oh yeah, that could actually be the truth. A man called Leopold Brandeis got his hands on some of the meat that had been preserved in glycerin, and he made the announcement that the meat wasn't actually meat at all. It was in fact something called nostoc. Nostoc is also sometimes called star jelly, troll's butter, spit of moon, fallen star, witch's butter, witch's jelly. I've never heard of any of those things, and honestly learning about it has made me deeply uncomfortable in a way that I can't quite explain. This whole episode has been quite uncomfortable for me. I went in thinking it was going to be light and easy, and honestly I felt nauseous for the good part of the last week. Nostoc is a type of cyanobacteria, so it's not a plant, it's not algae, it's not bacteria. It's this single-celled organism that contains no cell nucleus, and it is ancient. Nostoc was likely one of the first organisms on Earth that released oxygen into the atmosphere. It's this dark sort of blue-green jelly-like organism that can sometimes be found on lawns after periods of rain. It usually fills spaces where the grass doesn't grow, so it grows as a jelly but dries into this black shriveled substance, and then it plumps back up into jelly as soon as it's hydrated, so as soon as it rains basically. The name Nostoc literally comes from the English word nostril and the German Nasenloch, meaning the same thing, because it literally looks like nasal mucus. It looks like snot. But only when it's wet or hydrated. It's completely inconspicuous when it's dry, you wouldn't think anything of it. It's found in both terrestrial and aquatic environments. It has this unique ability to survive and colonize brand new areas with ease, so basically it can just pop up out of nowhere. But it was once thought that nostoc fell from the sky, that it floated on the breeze until it rained and then it appeared. So Leopold Brandeis said that the Kentucky nostoc, or Kentucky meat, belonged to a specific species called Nostoc carneum, which he said was flesh coloured. But with the magic of Google today, I can tell you that it's not, or at least I don't think it is. Google just showed it looking the same sort of blue-green algae-like colour as everything else. But in this theory, Brandeis seemed to forget one very important thing. It wasn't raining. Rebecca said this was a perfectly clear day. There wasn't even a single speck of rain, which very much goes against the theory of that time that nostoc fell with the rain. Nowadays we know that it doesn't, it just does appear, but at that time they thought it appeared with the rain, and that was what Brandeis' theory was based off of, and it wasn't raining. Nowadays we know that nostoc doesn't fall with the rain, but it does need rain to hydrate and turn into the jelly-like consistency. All in all, although this theory was spoken about a lot at the time, it wasn't correct. The meat was not nostoc. Brandeis did give a couple of the meat samples to other doctors though. A Dr. A. Mead Edwards examined it, and he said it was likely the lung tissue of a human infant or a horse. Another doctor, a Dr. Arnold, concluded that this was some kind of animal cartilage and lung tissue. In the end, according to Scientific America, 7 samples were examined by multiple scientists, all of whom confirmed that 2 of the samples were lung tissue, 3 were muscle tissue, and 2 were cartilage. All in all, it was meat, it was flesh. but that still doesn't confirm how it fell from the sky. At the time, there was a crazy theory about a knife fight nearby. Two brothers had gotten into an argument and they'd attacked each other with knives, and then apparently a rogue twister came along, picked up all the flesh pieces, and then rained it down on Rebecca Crouch. Yeah, I said crazy theory. I don't know if there were reports of a fight nearby of two dead brothers, because for there to have been this much flesh cut from them by each other, nonetheless, you would expect that they would either be dead or just incredibly mutilated. Also, like, what were they doing in this fight? Just like carefully slicing away each other's flesh into small strips? Like, I'm trying to picture how that knife fight would happen. Safe to say, that is not what happened here. Like, that theory, it was crazy. I just wanted to share it because it is insane. Really weird. Another absolutely wild theory I came across is that this was a meteoric shower, although I am pretty sure this was proposed as satire. I don't know, it's really hard to understand the tone of old articles with the old language and like old sentence structure, but this theory was written by a humorist called William Livingston Auden, so I am pretty sure it was satire, I think. Anyway, it says that there are these meteoric stones that revolve around the sun, so it only makes sense there is everything else revolving around the sun as well, including fragments of venison, mutton, and other meats. Scientists had theorized that these meteors around the sun were the result of exploded planets, so it only makes sense that the floating meat was the fragments of the aliens that had once lived on said planets. And then, just like meteor showers happen sometimes, this time it was a meat shower. The meat was just little bits of alien. I really do think this theory was a joke. I hope. But I think it's time we actually talk about a plausible theory, and this is a theory that is generally accepted, the thing that makes the most sense, and that is vulture vomit. Yep, really. And this has been a theory since early on. It was first proposed by a local farmer, and then a Dr. L.D. Casten Bean wrote about it in the Louisville Medical News in 1876. Casten Bean was yet another person who was able to get his hands on a sample of this meat. It was just being sent around to scientists everywhere, and in his testing he set fire to it, observing that it smelt exactly like rancid mutton. It made sense to Casten Bean that vultures, which are native to Kentucky, had been feasting on a dead sheep or a dead flock of sheep nearby, and then suddenly needed to take flight. Vultures have a fascinating evolutionary trait where if they're spooked or if there's a predator nearby, they are able to regurgitate their most recent meal in order to make themselves lighter and fly faster, fly away from the danger. So if these vultures had only recently been feasting on the sheep, that meat would be undigested, and it was over poor Rebecca's house that they decided to unload themselves of their stomach content, shall we say. It's not a particularly pleasant thought, but it's certainly the only theory I've heard that actually does make a good amount of sense. It is still just a theory though, because Mary didn't report seeing any vultures flying overhead, and you would think that she would notice that amount of vultures. You'd assume it would have to be a lot of them in order to rain down half a bushel of raw meat. That's 17 litres of raw meat. That would be a lot of vultures. So yeah, the people who went round tasting this meat may well have been eating vulture vomit. Yeah, vulture vomit. People have tried to get more answers in recent years, but it's unlikely we'll ever know anything for sure. This is just going to have to be one of those mysteries that we make peace with. Although apparently not everyone can do that. There's a professor of art at the Transylvania University called Kurt Godey, and he's been fascinated by this story ever since he first heard about it like decades ago. And then one day when he was clearing out storage cupboards at the university, he just so happened to come across an old glass jar sealed with a cork. This glass jar contained a chunk of white meat. It was suspended in a yellow liquid with the label Olympian Springs. It was a sample of the meat. He worked very closely with the biology department at the university to test it, but the sample was just too old at this point. I think it was the early 2000s, so the sample would have been 120, 130 years old. So yeah, the testing wasn't able to ascertain any new information from this, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. Instead, Godey went to a taste lab in Cincinnati and got them to analyse the flavour compounds of the meat and then put that taste into a jelly bean. Seriously. Apparently he got like thousands of these beans made, and then he went round his local area in Kentucky asking people to taste the beans and then educated them about the story in the process. Apparently these beans tasted absolutely vile, as you'd expect, and didn't really taste like mutton. Imagine being just a poor, unsuspecting person walking around your hometown in Kentucky, and then this guy comes up to you and he's like, hey, do you want a jelly bean? It tastes like meat that fell from the sky that may or may not have been vulture vomit 150 years ago. Have one. I would... no, absolutely not. But yeah, at least he educated people about the story. Like, he just liked talking about it. So yeah, that's the story of the Kentucky meat shower. Does your life feel better for knowing this story? Do you feel like this is a story you wanted to know? Because if I had to learn about it, you do too. Maybe this story isn't as gross as I personally think it is, but like I said, I have a particularly weak stomach when it comes to food and old food in general. Like, I can't even watch like a Taskmaster task where they're handling food and they've got to like make things out of food. It turns my stomach. I can't do it. I don't know why I thought this would be like a fun and easy time for me, because this was actually really rough. But I hope you enjoyed the story. I hope you found it entertaining at the very least. And of course, a huge thank you to Ana Luisa for sponsoring this video. I could not continue making the content that I do without the help of sponsors. So it really is truly amazing. Honestly, I genuinely love everything that I have from Ana Luisa. I wear these earrings all the time. I have another Ana Luisa necklace that I wear constantly. I know full well I'm going to get so much wear out of these items. If you're looking for good quality jewellery, Ana Luisa is the place to go without breaking the bank. I promise you. I just genuinely really love their stuff. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye guys.